Hi, and welcome to the third and final DI refresher session where we're going to be talking about experimentation and evolution. If you haven't had a chance to tune in, both of the previous sessions have been recorded and they're on our DI Google site, our YouTube page, and they've been sent out to you over email, as this one will be as well. Today, we're going to focus on experimentation and evolution and really talk about what a PDSA cycle is, explain why we would use PDSA cycles, and prepare to engage in experimentation and evolution as part of the DI process. For those of you who haven't met me yet, I'm Erin Anderson. I'm a professor at University of Denver and the program lead for this project. And what that means is that I take care of a lot of the technical pieces, as well as a lot of the content for the workshops that we have for your coaching sessions. I work very closely with your coaches, Patty and Ellen, to figure out how to best support you, and very closely with Sandy Lockheed in the Impact office. And I think it's important to mention, if you need any support from the district or you need to discuss some barriers to the work with somebody at central office, Sandy Lockheed should be your contact person for that. So, as we embark on this last refresher session, I just wanted to take a second and talk a little bit about what was DI again. And so, it is a process and it moves through 5 stages, not always in a linear fashion, but it is presented to you in a linear fashion. From discovery, which is where you understand the problem and the system that produces it. And you can see in this graphic here that includes empathy interviews, that includes process mapping, that includes creating fishbone diagrams and doing 5 whys, all with the intention of moving into the interpretation phase, which is where you create a driver diagram that includes your aim or your overall SMART goal for your theory of improvement, the drivers, both primary and secondary, that you believe are impacting the problem and your aim. And then as you move into ideation, you'll also include on there change ideas that you come up with that you think will move those drivers in order to move the aim. Once you've created that, you start to figure out which change ideas you want to focus on and which ones you think are highest leverage, which ones you think that the school is most ready to work on. And from there, you move into experimentation. And that is where you're actually testing and building evidence through PDSA cycles while also tracking your progress towards your aim so that you can both know how a change idea worked, if it worked, and if it improved anything, and map that onto your aim data so that you can have a sense of when you started certain change ideas, when they got scaled up school-wide, and which ones might be having the greatest impact on moving you towards your aim or your ultimate goal for your theory of improvement. And that's really what happens in that evolution phase. So this is where you're spreading and scaling promising ideas. So you might test them out in just one classroom or with one team or a group of teachers until you iterate it to something that you really think is going to work for the school. And evolution can also include spreading and scaling outside of your school. So really starting to think about how you can work with other schools in the district to accelerate learning by testing out change ideas together. And just a reminder, all of this is kind of operating under a model for improvement, where we think about what we're specifically trying to accomplish or our aim, what change ideas we might introduce and why, and how will we know if that change idea is actually an improvement. And that's the PDSA piece, the plan, do, study, act cycle, is how we know if that change is actually an improvement or not. So in phase 4 experimentation, you're testing and building evidence. And really, this is all based off the scientific method that you probably learned in elementary school, and some of you may currently teach to students today, where you hypothesize what's going to happen if you do something, you conduct that experiment or do that thing, you collect data to understand what happened and analyze it, and then you reach some kind of conclusion. And so this hypothesize, experiment, analyze, and conclusion is really a plan, do, study, act cycle. And when we think about that PDSA cycle and that plan phase, that's where you're really going to spend time talking about what's your change, building out a prototype of a change idea, and then thinking about what do you think this change idea is going to do. So if, for example, if we pick up on the example from last week about new teachers not coming prepared and turning over at higher rates, then you might design a induction program that you think and that you predict is going to connect those new teachers to more veteran teachers in the building, is going to help them build relationships with each other, and is going to help them build trust with the principal, let's say. So you're going to create that change idea, make predictions about what you think is going to change, then figure out how you can measure those predictions. So maybe those are exit interviews or a plus delta at the end of an induction session that you can really get a sense of whether or not this is working or not. So in that plan phase, you're asking questions, you're formulating hypotheses, and you're essentially designing an experiment. From there, you do it and you execute that test, and you make sure to collect data and document observations from what you've learned. So you would want to have somebody whose role it is to attend one of these induction sessions and observe and maybe even talk to people formally and informally, or do empathy interviews to understand the experience that people are having. Then you have evidence that you can evaluate or study. And that's where you really compare what are the results to what I predicted. So if you thought it was going to increase trust with the principal or help develop relationships between new teachers, then that's when you figure out, did that happen? And if it did, why? And if it didn't, why? And from there, you decide what to do next. And usually you may those are thought of as adapting. So maybe it didn't quite work, but through that study phase, you figured out what some of the problems might be. And now you're going to adapt it and test it again. Maybe it worked really well and you're going to go ahead and adopt it. Or maybe it really just didn't work and it's time to abandon it. And other options are to retest it again if you didn't feel like you learned enough information, or if there's kind of competing evidence, then you might just want to test it again as is. But one thing to think about with these PDSA cycles is for one change idea, you're not going to do it just once. You're probably going to test it out several times until you get to an iterated version of your original plan that you really think is worth adopting. And this process can break down, and these are some of the ways in which it can. So one problem is that people don't actually make predictions. They just do what we've always done, is come up with ideas and do them and say, oh, that felt pretty good. Let's go ahead and keep this. Well, if you don't have predictions about why you're doing this idea that tie to making progress in the drivers that you laid out in your theory of improvement or driver diagram, then you don't really know for sure if the change is an improvement or not. Another problem that people often fall prey to is having a really unspecific change idea. So being like, we're going to do professional development, but not really laying out exactly what that means. Another place where it can break down is you do it, but you don't collect the information on it. So there's a PDSA tracker that we ask you all to use. You have an Excel and Word option. Most schools have chosen to go with the Word option. It's really important that you collect information in that tracker, not for us, not for your coach, not for your instructional superintendent, but for your team, to have a place to see what have we tried, what do we know about it, and what do we need to do different next time. And if you forget to collect that information, then you probably can't really study it and learn from it. So this is the other piece of where things can break down is you do a PDSA cycle, but you don't make space. You don't have a routine for learning. You don't have a set time for the group to come together. You don't have a protocol for what that looks like, or you're not really strategic in how you're testing it. You just quote unquote test it. But really you're just scaling something up school-wide and calling it a PDSA cycle. And then I think it's really important that you set up kind of the social cultural settings that allow the group to have conversations and make sense of what they learned from the PDSA cycles. And then the last kind of area where this can break down is that you might have difficulty figuring out what happened. Like, what did you learn? What are the ahas? What do you need to change? And that might be a space in which you just retest and try to rethink the data you're collecting, or create a better tracking system, or create a better way to make sense of what you've learned. So there's a lot of spots where this can break down, and it can often become a do-act cycle. So, but the really important learning actually happens in that planning and studying. We always do and then act, but it's the planning and studying that really makes this process support your improvement much more deeply and intentionally and strategically. So here's an example of the PDSA tracker that we've been using most recently with you all. And if this doesn't look familiar to you, your coach will definitely be introducing it to you very soon. And what this tracker allows you to do is to identify what driver you're working on. So this is an example from the simulation that we usually do at the start of all this around chronic absenteeism. And in that example, they create a chronic absenteeism family meeting protocol. And that protocol is meant to address the driver of parent awareness and engagement in order to help solve the problem of chronic absenteeism and make progress towards the aim statement of reducing chronic absenteeism from 16 to 18%. So basically cutting it in half. So all of those pieces at the top there, the driver, the change idea, the aim statement, are all things that you can pull straight out of your driver diagram to add onto your tracking sheet. And so again, in addition to thinking about your aim statement, what your driver is and what your change idea, and if you remember, your change idea should impact your driver, which should impact your aim statement. You also want a goal of the test itself. So this is where you think about what are you trying to do with this change idea? And so in this case, they want to know, is this effective for structuring a meeting? Does it help the parent better understand the importance of attending school and the consequences for continued absences? So as a team, through all that discovery that they've done, they've come to decide that part of the problem with chronic absenteeism might be that parents don't understand why it is important to attend school and what the consequences are. Whether or not you agree with that assessment or not, this is this team's just goal. So from that goal, then you start to think about the data that you're going to want to collect to know if you are helping them better understand why to attend school and the consequences. And you also want to think about who's going to be part of this. Who's going to be actually having testing the change idea, so being the doer, the one doing it, in this case, the one executing the family meeting protocol, and then who's going to be the one kind of watching, collecting information. So again, in this plan phase, you think about what do you want to learn and what do you think will happen? This is that prediction. So they want to learn how much parents and students are going to talk, the emotional reaction of parents and students, among other things. So then they lay out what data they could collect to find out those things. So that could be simple as counting number of sentences spoken by both, just doing qualitative observations of the emotional state, doing a parent plus delta feedback after the protocol is over. Then you do, and you actually record how did my results compare to my predictions. So if they were thinking that parents and students would both talk a lot or equally, and they count the number of sentences, and the parents do have talk 6 times and the students talk none, then you can learn from that this didn't encourage student involvement in their understanding of their chronic absenteeism. And even parents saying 6 sentences over the course of the protocol might not be enough talking from them either. So the protocol you design might be too school driven and not enough family driven. And then what did you do? You would keep track of that while you followed the steps, the protocol as written, and so forth and so on. And then what did you learn? In this case, they learned that the protocol was not very successful and that there wasn't a lot of dialogue. And then what they decided to do was adapt and test again. So this is how you use this tracking sheet, and you're welcome to revise it in any way that works for you. So from there, you move into evolution. And so, as I mentioned before, a PDSA cycle doesn't usually just end at one cycle. It can, but it doesn't typically. And usually it starts with some kind of initial hunches and ideas about what you can do to make change. And those hunches or ideas might come from experience. They might come from a book you've read or other research you've engaged in. And then usually what happens is you start out with a small scale test. So maybe you try it with one classroom or with one parent. And then you follow up until you feel like it's ready to adopt. And then you might go more wide scale and do it with every parent meeting or across all of the classrooms until you really get to the point where you've implemented it across the building and you're hoping to see change that'll produce quality with reliability at scale. Another important thing to think about is one change idea is not going to solve your entire problem. So the supportive family meeting is one series of PDSA cycles. And in the example from High Tech High, they iterated this about 6 times till they got to a supportive family meeting protocol that they felt good about. And then they moved on to another change idea. And they PDSA'd that and iterated it as many times as they needed to, and another change idea and another change idea, with the hope of getting to a set of ideas that are going to reduce chronic absenteeism when put together, or what we often refer to as a bundle of change ideas. And the last thing I want to mention that's important is that, especially when you're thinking about evolution, you're collecting data for each PDSA cycle, but you're also collecting some kind of aim data, which is ideally something that can go on a line chart, and you can see over the course of time, whatever the thing is that you're measuring for your aim, is it going up? Is it going down? Is it variable? And then you can map onto there. So in this case, at this third time point that they've measured, that's when the first change idea was implemented school-wide, for instance. And you see that there was a pretty big dip, but then it moved up and then down and then up. So maybe that change idea is not something that you want to keep adopting school-wide, or maybe it's something you need to think about adapting. And then a few weeks later, there's an introduction of another change idea. And from there, you can see the upward trajectory. This is a change idea that might be a winner and something that you want to scale up or maybe even share with other schools in the district, because you're starting to see that it is leading to improvement. So if anybody has any questions for me, feel free to reach out and email me, or to put them on the Jamboard that I've shared with you before. I also just wanted to mention a PDSA activity that I think is really helpful. that you can do with your group at your school to help kind of build an understanding of PDSA. It's included here at the end of the presentation. And what you do in this activity is you actually spin coins. And so you get a penny, a nickel, a dime, a quarter, various different types of coins. You have somebody who spins the coin, somebody who keeps track of the time, and somebody who documents the theory being tested. You know that 25.71 seconds is the longest coin spinning duration, and you use that to create a driver diagram and maybe set a name of spinning the coin for 17 seconds. You might determine that the drivers for this are the force, so how hard somebody's spinning, the surface it's being spun on, and the size and weight of the coin. From there, you're testing out various change ideas. So your theory might be that a large coin is going to last longer. So you make a prediction. A nickel will be 10 seconds. You do it. It starts to wobble at 7 seconds. Nope, it's 3 seconds short. And you adapt the next time by testing a quarter. And this exercise is just kind of a fun way to introduce PDSA to a group of people, and something that we use in our initial training. From there, you would have people choose different change ideas and do at least 5 cycles of testing, record the results, and then share out how making predictions and recording influenced their learning, and what did and did not accelerate your learning. So thank you for spending time today, getting refreshed on experimentation and evolution. Hopefully you're able to watch all 3 videos together if you kind of want to understand the whole process, or any of these individual refresher videos to help support your learning as you move throughout the year. Thanks.